Hi everyone, I'm the Plant Propagator and welcome to my channel. It is a beautiful morning here in Southwest Florida, 73 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a little over 22 degrees Celsius. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning and just a great day. You may be able to hear the pigeons cooing and the other birds chattering and singing. So just a great morning, not a cloud in the sky, a nice day. What I want to do today is just go over one little thing. I don't really want to show too much of my orchid stuff, but I want to talk a little bit about roots. And what I want to talk about is roots that are in pots. So kind of pot-bound roots in plants. Not orchids today. The main thing I want to talk about is the plant behind me. That is one that I like to grow, but it produces fruits, and it's not one of the fruits that I even like. So I don't do it. I don't grow this plant for fruits for me, but I really like growing the plant. And this, if you can tell, behind me, this is tomato, and it is a big tomato plant. So the plant itself, you can't tell. But the plant is about 6 feet tall, about 2 meters tall, and it is a big plant. The thing is, this plant is not growing in the ground. Here in Southwest Florida, we have really bad problems with a root knot nematode, and this is a real severe pest with tomatoes that are grown in the ground, at least in this area. Now I've got resistant varieties that I grow, but it just doesn't matter. The nematodes still love chewing on this plant, and as a result of that, in order to get the plants growing nicely, I have to put them in pots and above the ground in soil. And the soil that I use is it's a moisture retaining potting mix that I really like using around here. The problem with tomato, really almost any plant that you put in pots in this area, it is so warm, the weather is so nice, is that, as you can tell, these plants get big. So I've got a fairly large plant. The pot itself is pretty big, but eventually what's going to happen is the plant's going to get too big for the pot, and here it doesn't take long for that to happen. Okay, so what do you do, and how can you deal with this? Well, what I do is I water my plant. I water this plant. I used to water it every week, and then every 3 to 4 days, and then every other day. But now this plant is at the point where I have to water it every single day. There's a really good potting mix. It's a moisture retentive, so I can add water to it, and the water actually gets absorbed by the water absorbing particles that are in this potting mix. And I should say this potting mix is a little more expensive, but moisture control is the name of it, and it's just really good, and I highly recommend it. The plants, the tomatoes, and all the other plants that I have in this potting mix really do well in there. So I've got two tomato plants, or actually 2 pots of tomato plants growing this potting mix. And again, eventually what will happen is the plant will get so tall and so large that you're going to have to water this thing every day. All right, so what's the point? Well, the point is that roots, normally when you have plants growing in soil, what happens is the roots spread out to the drip line and then beyond. And you can't tell, but behind you in the camera are palm trees. And palm trees really, the roots really spread out well beyond the drip line. The drip line is where, when it rains here, it's where the drips come out of the tree. But I am well beyond the drip line of this tree, and when this pool was put in, there were a lot of palm roots that had to be, that were cut and removed in order to get this pool in. So in certain plants, the roots extend well beyond the drip line. And The reason I'm bringing this up is because the roots on some of these plants can be really extensive and they can spread out. So when it rains, and especially in certain times of the year here, it's very dry. And when it rains, those roots absorb all the moisture. And the roots of most of the palm trees here, they're on the surface. Sometimes they go down a little bit, but most roots, again, they stay on the surface because when it rains, that's where the water collection occurs. So it's important to understand roots, a little bit about roots and a little bit about how roots grow. Now, later, not going to go over today, I'm going to talk about root anatomy. Yikes! But I want to talk about this because it's important to understand for certain applications what the structure of the roots is. And it's different for different plants, but not today. All right, so, but the roots just in general, the morphology and how the roots grow, they kind of grow out along the ground surface. Orchids, for example, they grow in the wild, they grow the epiphytic orchids, they grow and the roots will attach to the tree that they're mounted on. And they will spread out pretty far. I've got some orchids that are about this tall, where the plants themselves are this tall, but the roots extend quite a distance. So the roots are an important part. They're, again, responsible for taking in the moisture. In orchids, the roots are, in most orchids, the roots can be photosynthetic or are photosynthetic. When you water them, they can turn a little green. Okay, but back to the tomato plant. Okay, so what does this mean? When you have a big plant that would normally have roots spread out quite a bit, collecting moisture, when you have a big plant like that, restricted to a pot, it just isn't going to it's not going to work the same. And when you pull the roots, when you pull the plant out of the pot, and I can't do that with this because this pot and the plant is so big, you'll see the roots that will be growing along the edge of the pot soil interface. But they can't really spread out too far. They're trying to, but they can't spread out. So they're kind of stuck there. The point that I want to make here is that this plant needs to be watered every day. I already said that. But the more important point is that even if it rains, and in this part of Florida, during the rainy season, it can rain every day, that's not enough to sustain this plant because the roots are restricted to such a small area. So if my irrigation comes on and the surface gets wet, and right, the surface, it'll go down maybe, this much. The water will go down that much through the soil, or maybe a little bit further. But the pot is so big and the roots are down in there and they're so crowded, so it doesn't matter if it gets irrigated every day. It doesn't matter if it rains every day. This plant, this huge tomato plant, still is going to need to be watered and doused with water every day. Now, when you look at this, and this is the tomato, you got to think, well, the same thing may be the case for some orchids that are in pots. And so what happens when you have these orchids in the pots, again, you have the roots, sometimes they'll stream over the edge of the pot, or whatever container they're in. But you have to understand that if the plant is pretty vigorous, you'll have the same things. You'll have a lot of roots in a very restricted area. And so what that means is that in orchids, they tend to be a little bit more tolerant of dryness. So they don't need to be watered, every day. But if you've got a lot of roots, if you've got a big plant, you got to consider dousing it every few days. So you want to water it to the point so that the water runs out of this, but also this big tomato as well, frequently. And you have to, I guess the point is that you have to be aware of the roots and how they're forming within pots and how often, and that kind of dictates how often you should water your plants. All right, so that was a long, convoluted journey that I just went on, talking about roots and how they grow when they're either left unrestricted and they can grow out, or up and down a tree in case of orchids, or when they're restricted to a pot. And there's different ways that you will treat the plant depending on whether it's just out, whether the roots are spreading out or the roots are in a pot and pot bound. All right, so that's my point today. quick video, quick point. I just wanted to share that information with you. So again, that's all I have. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you liked what you saw and you want to keep on seeing my videos, it would help me out if you can click on like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you're not already a subscriber. Okay, that's all I have for today. Happy propagating.